All right, welcome everyone to our Mercury Retrograde webinar. As you can see on your screen, Mercury goes retrograde today, May 18th. Depending on what time we get done with our class, we're going to end it about right on the dot with Mercury standing still in the sky. It's retrograde May 18th through June 11th, and from 13 degrees Gemini to 4 degrees Gemini. Before we get started with our class, though, I have a few housekeeping slides. I thank you for allowing me to go through them. First of all, here at the Evolutionary Astrology Network, you can learn with us in a variety of different ways. You can subscribe and listen to our free weekly audio podcasts that we produce. You can subscribe to our Astro Library, or you can enroll in our multimedia course. Our Astro Library is divided into 3 different sections. You can see these on your screen. This is a dozen years of materials by myself and other evolutionary astrologers that we have recorded. And you can subscribe for 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that can be canceled at any time. You can do the same with all 3 sections of the Astro Library if you would like to. Our multimedia course is divided into 3 segments. You can see them. Segment 1 is philosophy, the archetypes of EA, and how to do the basics of a chart interpretation. Segment 2 is more into relationships. Segment 3, health and wellness. You can see these each come with binders of materials, including the Jeffrey Wolf Green transcript of the original school he taught, access to over 275 hours of audio files and webinar classes. And now we also offer segments 1 and 2 completely online, in which you can get all the same materials, but you access it all from whatever internet-friendly device you use. More information, you can go to our website and check it out. We also have a new workshop that's for sale, and I'm going to allow Leroy to come along and give us some of the information on that. I just put up a quick slide. He knows the details better than me.
Well, we have a great drop-down menu on our homepage of the website. It is the Astro Library drop-down. So you've seen the Astro Library subscriptions that Kim just described. We also have an individual workshop page that is very inviting for anybody that's newer to these types of webinars or newer to EA, probably coming, perhaps coming from another discipline of astrology, wants to kind of check out evolutionary astrology. We have some very low-cost items in there as you scroll down that individual workshop page. But this is a feature product that we just completed live in February down in Florida. And it's Kim Marie basically processing 8 charts in depth. And we have put all 8 of those charts up, streaming video directly from our website, so you can get access to the information directly from your account page and watch the master in action, so to speak, as she goes into a new level of chart interpretation. This may not be the most appropriate bundle for newer astrologers, but for those that are reading family and friends' charts, for those that are practicing astrology, it's a great product. Again, the tuition was originally $159. We have it on sale for the next couple of days through Sun and Gemini at $129 for 15 hours of material. So thank you for considering that. Again, it's the Astro Library drop-down link, individual workshops page.
Thank you. And so here again, we are going to look at Mercury retrograde in Gemini tonight. And so a few basic slides for you if you've attended these free webinars on Mercury before. Some of these slides you might recognize here at the beginning. So the question of why planetary retrogrades in general. Basically, the principle of psychological compensation is being out of sync with your own true nature. We're compensating on who we truly, authentically are. And almost all souls have psychological compensations in order to appear, quote unquote, normal in what we call the consensus world, or to get along with everybody else. And these psychological compensations can take place anywhere we as an individual have dissatisfaction in our life. And you just can do a basic observation of status quo. However, in astrology, we can look for those clues as to what those compensations are and how they manifest by looking at each of our planetary archetypes, talking the planets that go retrograde, Mercury through Pluto. We can look at them via their sign, house, the aspects they make, evolutionary state of our soul, consensus, individuating, spirituating, and of course the environmental conditionings that are going to be unique to each of us. And so planetary retrogrades basically offer us that opportunity to break free from where we compensate, where we are out of sync with ourselves. And when we break free, we have that opportunity to align or realign with our own natural individual personality nature. It also allows us to return to what EA calls natural spiritual laws and principles versus all the human-made distortions and conditionings. Oops, not too fast. So basically, retrogrades are always a geocentric or Earth-centered phenomena. We know that all the planets now revolve around the sun. But here on planet Earth, as we watch these planets in the evening skies, they'll appear to slow down, stop, go backwards, before they then slow down, stop, and go forward again. So it's something that we view from here on planet Earth. Planetary retrogrades, again, cause a withdrawal from the status quo of whatever our world is with that particular planet. In Mercury's case, it's going to be left brain, communicating, mentally processing through information. We withdraw from our personal status quo to redefine that planetary archetype, whatever it is. So retrograde planets in general are non-static. They're in process of throwing things off, and that opens us up to the perpetual state of evolving, moving, growing. The sign and house of a planetary retrograde will describe its manifestation. The opposite sign and house will provide clarity, expression, answers. And answers to retrograde lessons in general always come from within ourselves. Now, if you happen to be born with a natal planet retrograde, that means you will be learning this as an individual lesson relative to that planet or planets retrograde throughout your entire lifetime. When the transiting planet is retrograde, as is the case with Mercury retrograde, we have both individual and collective lessons that we are all in process of learning. In other words, each of us are going to be experiencing our own personal lessons and evolution with Mercury retrograde, and the planet as a whole collectively learns lessons with Mercury retrograde. I had an email last week from a extended family member who's never done astrology, emailed me and said, I have a girlfriend going through a divorce and she's moving on with a new relationship, and somebody told her, get this little detail, somebody told her maybe she shouldn't do that with Mars retrograde. And the email was, does Mars go retrograde? I've heard of Mercury retrograde. I thought it was Mercury retrograde. And so I emailed her back and I said, she probably meant Mercury retrograde. And I talked about this one and I said, your friend, if she's starting a new relationship and wants to take it deeper. That's what the email was about. I said she may want to just slow down a little bit through this Mercury retrograde, because in Gemini there's a good chance there's going to be some information revealed that can have an factor on how she chooses to go forward with this new individual, or if she chooses to go forward and become intimate with them. So my point here is that even down to some of the most mundane in society, they're starting to get a handle about Mercury retrograde. Wouldn't it be ironic if the Mercury retrograde cycles were what really opened the door to the larger general public understanding astrology and perhaps practicing astrology? Stay tuned. If you were born with Mercury retrograde natally, for instance, this is true of any planet, if you're born with Mercury retrograde natally and it goes retrograde by transit, for that time period that Mercury's retrograde, you will have a temporary harmony imbalance because the planet in the sky is matching your natal planet. This is true whether it's Mars or Uranus or whatever. Now, if you are born with natal planets that are just getting ready to turn stationary, retrograde, or direct, it intensifies things. If you're born with a planet stationary, retrograde, just before, just after, review is absolutely necessary with this planetary archetype. You have got to throw off the past before you will be allowed to move forward with that archetype. If you're born with a planet turning stationary direct, either just before it turns direct, just after, then you've had the review, so to speak, in past life, and you are ready to move forward. And as a matter of fact, the universe is pushing that planetary archetype forward. Now, here's a little bit of astronomy for Mercury. As we are seeing ourselves over here on planet Earth, and we're looking at the sun in the western sky, the furthest up in the sky we'll see Mercury is 29 degrees. Venus, I think, is 48 degrees. That's the elongation. That's that angle of Mercury's separation from our viewpoint. Mercury goes around the sun every 88 days. It's due to its 3 to 4 retrogrades per year that make it appear to take a year to go around the zodiac, much like Earth and Sun. Mean daily motion is 1.5 degrees. You can see the retrograde cycles. Retrograde period is 20 to 24 days. It stands still in the sky 1 day. Many times astrologers will say day before, day of, day after, Mercury retrograde, Mercury direct. That's when everything gets pretty intensified. Sometimes I think that can be extended out. I'm sure you've all experienced things happening in your world a few days before or after Mercury changes direction. Here's a slide I'm just going to leave in. I'm not going to talk about it very much. This came from Robert Blaschke's Earthwalk School of Astrology, and you can take a look at this when you get the PDF of this slideshow and match up all the dots with where Mercury is in the sky between its interior and exterior conjunctions. Here's how we would visually look at it if we looked at Mercury in the nighttime sky every single night that it was retrograde. All the planetary retrogrades would appear this way. We have Mercury moving along. It enters shadow, which is where it's going to turn direct again. Here's the first shadow time period that it's going through. Here's where it appears to stand still, stop. Here's the actual retrograde and goes all the way back to the time it was at that first spot and entered shadow. Now it's direct, and now it's entering the shadow after its retrograde, and it leaves shadow when it once more passes over the spot where it first went retrograde. Now here's the dates for the timing of Mercury doing this through the sky. Whoops, I thought I had another slide in first. I got those dates coming up for you. We'll look at those in just a moment here. But I've been noticing something as I've worked with Mercury retrograde for several decades. The retrograde cycles of Mercury reverse through the elements. How many of you learned how to say fire, earth, air, water in your sleep? How many of you can say water, air, earth, fire, water, air, earth, fire? That's how Mercury reverse or goes through the elements as it is moving through the signs of the zodiac and doing its retrograde. It spends approximately 1 year in one element. Say, for instance, this year, all 3 Mercury retrogrades are in the element of air, and then it makes the following year transitioning. Now, I started looking ahead to retrogrades in 2016-17, and they're not really following a calendar year, but they are following more or less a year in time. You might be aware of the fact that we already had a Mercury retrograde in Aquarius. This one's Gemini. The next one will be Libra. So Mercury's in the element of air, in the air signs, 6.5 months of 2015. Talk about communications and details and flurry of activity and feeling like there's lots of change going on and everyone wants to be heard. So you can see here how the 2016 and 17 retrograde cycle patterns will go. Here is just a quick slideshow on the Mercury archetype. The outer side of Mercury is its rulership of Gemini and the 3rd house. And we say outer because Gemini 3rd house is the polarity, is the active polarity, which is energy moving out from the center. So as you can see here, active mutable air. Archetype of conscious mind, left brain. This is how any soul wants to define the phenomenal world, the manifested world, with facts, words, figures, classifications. It's what makes it easier to communicate when we all know that the word phone covers that device that allows us to talk to other people. So Mercury has rulership of all forms of communication, whether it's speaking or writing. You can see how Mercury, I like to say Mercury has co-rulership of a lot of technology with Uranus. I don't think it's limited to those two either. But look at how we use our phones for communicating, texting, Facebook, actually talking on the phone, which is apparently, is losing to, Twitter and texting and Facebook and Instagram and all that kind of stuff that's going on. We do the same thing with our computers and PCs and laptops and tablets. Mercury rules all of that stuff. Mercury is also, with its rulership of Gemini, those twins. And basically, it's not talking about 2 twin people necessarily. I have some example tonight, where this is actually going to be the case, that it's that duality of energy that all the air signs will hold. Libra, it's balancing the scales. Aquarius, it's the double lightning bolt or zigzag that you see. It just talks about that mutability and adaptability and versatility of the air signs. And so you perhaps know those who have, planets in Gemini or the 3rd house, and they're great at debate, or they can find the weakest link in any argument. They can always expose the relativity of truth to any of the Sag polarity righteousness that's going on. This slide right here with all of this little pieces of information is what this retrograde is about, because Mercury's retrograde in one of its own signs of rulership. So are we going to process information this way or that way? Are we going to let something go that no longer serves us on a mental capacity? Or are we going to cling to it for security reasons? That's, again, what that duality of the twins are like. I'll show you a little more about Mercury retrograde in Gemini, but here's the inner side of Mercury, with its rulership of Virgo in the 6th house, at least at this point in time. This is the polarity of passive energy moving back to the center, passive mutable earth. And so this is why we call it inner Mercury. Still conscious mind, still left brain. But here, Mercury tends to learn how to now take all this information that is trying to label and classify, and whereas Gemini just fits along all over the place, the Virgo side of Mercury tries to make sense of it. It's still doing it in a left brain way, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3, but it's having an ability to look at it a little more deeply than, say, Gemini, and I do not mean any judgment here. It's just this is where we come up with these Virgo 6th house words of analyze, self-reflect, purification, adapting, our reasoning capacities, the ability to want to have self-improvement. This is Mercury building upon itself to this second sign. Now it also happens, because it rules Virgo and the polarity Pisces, that we bring in all of the sadomasochism here that EA talks about. And basically, it's just the human-made conditioning that we've had for thousands of years. Have all of us imperfect humans feeling that sense of guilt on pretty deep levels. And guilt linked to atonement is victim and masochism. Guilt linked to anger is the victor and the sadist. Both are distortions of natural law. And it takes an effort with Mercury's rulership of Virgo in the 6th house to be able to work through this sense of guilt with this archetype. If we turn it inward, we become full of inner criticism. Inner criticism attracts outer criticism. So one of the things we say about the Virgo 6th house Mercury archetype is your cup half empty or is your cup half full? And what Mercury's really trying to do here when it works on the self-improvement, this is where we're coming from the Leo, full of self-egoic energy, transitioning with Virgo, learning how to serve another or serve society, to then transition into Libra equality, hopefully. So when Mercury goes retrograde in general, all of this stuff becomes more active. Is it this or is it that? Well, how can I figure this out? What can I do? What do I do in, ABC situation with my coworker? Should I speak to them? Okay. Should I write him a letter? Well, if I decide to speak to him, how do I want to approach the subject so that they can hear me when I, blah, 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 blah. So you can see from these two rulerships of Mercury that all of the, again, key words that I've been bringing up here, archetypes, all become activated with a Mercury retrograde. Here's those dates I was telling you about with that slideshow. Here's the last time Mercury had the superior exterior conjunction to the Sun, 20 degrees Aries last month. Here's where it entered shadow, May 4th, when it first approached 4 degrees Gemini. It's going retrograde today, May 18th, 13 Gemini. Here's the interior conjunction. The highlight of all planetary retrogrades is the conjunction in the case of Mercury and Venus, or the opposition, Mars through Pluto, to the Sun. That will take place May 30th, 9 degrees Gemini. There's Mercury direct. Here's where Mercury leaves shadow. And here is where the next superior conjunction, exterior conjunction to the Sun will be. Mercury is in Gemini for a little over 2 months, from April 30th all the way through July 8th. And I found this cute little quote on the internet. Ideas are like stars. We can't physically touch them, but like the mariners of the sea, we chart our course by them. I have no idea who Carl Schurz is, but I thought, oh, that's a little appropriate for Mercury retrograde in Gemini because we're full of ideas in our head right now. And how are we going to rearrange all of those ideas over the next 3 weeks as we decide how we're going forward this spring?
Kim?
Yes?
I just wanted to give you a moment just to take a drink of water and breathe a little bit as we all have lots of thoughts and information flying around here. I've noticed a lot of new names on the board as we are filling out the attendance tonight for this free webinar. So I just kind of wanted to back things up a little bit. If people haven't noticed that are newer to evolutionary astrology, this is a very spiritual and psychological form of astrology. It's a wonderful look at the essence of that soul that we come into this lifetime as. We mentioned earlier about the individual workshop page, and I just kind of wanted to take time to make a special invitation for those newer to EA to find that Astro Library drop-down menu on the home page and go to that individual workshops page and scroll all the way down. Some of the more intermediate to beginner stuff is in an area called More Streaming Workshops. You'll see the EA Introductory Workshop is a great way to dip your toe in the water, so to speak. You can enjoy that Reader's Digest version, so to speak, of evolutionary astrology. It's 15 hours, the entire workshop. You can purchase it just a couple hours at a time for $10 per session, and that's a great way to get a new look at this methodology that we're so proud of here at EA. Also, while you're there, take a look at under more workshops. You get into some of the basics of the evolutionary astrology methodology as well. We talk about Venus and Mars retrograde under a category called Love in the Rearview Mirror that we produced up in Canada, I think, about 5-6 years ago. Anyway, just kind of wanted to point out that that's a key point for newer people on this public webinar to get more familiar with some of the core understandings and the basics of evolutionary astrology.
Thank you, Leroy. So, moving along here. So, Mercury retrograde. I don't have as many slides as I typically do because I realize Mercury's retrograde in its own sign. The basics here are the basics. It's a little bit of a simpler processing than, say, like last Mercury retrograde in Aquarius or next Mercury retrograde in Libra. So, this is basics of Mercury retrograde, but it's still absolutely identical to Mercury retrograde in its own sign of Gemini. It's a time period to release excess thought. Our mind, our conscious mind, our left brain is saturated. And so it's hard to take in any new information. It's hard to process through the information and ideas in life. Mercury retrograde is a time to quiet the mind. Let it go. It's a time period to review and release worn out mental patterns. You know how Mercury can align itself with the word worry or the word anxiety? Leroy's mother, my mother-in-law, is Sun in Gemini, and she's in her early 80s, and she is quite proud of telling us it is her job to worry. Leroy and I laugh every time and go, well, how much difference do you make when you worry? I read this great quote one time. I'm going to have to paraphrase it. Worry takes away from the peace of today. So Mercury retrograde is about learning to let go of those old mental patterns and of worry, anxiety, those mercurial words that you may know. Take a deep breath. Let them out. When Mercury's retrograde, we're going from left brain to right brain. So Mercury as ruler of Gemini points to Sagittarius, Jupiter. That's specifically what we are looking at with this particular retrograde cycle. The intuition, the right brain, the whole is greater than the parts that make it up. And Mercury as ruler of Virgo in general points to Pisces and its ruler Neptune. So you can just see right there through that mutable quadrant that Mercury retrograde is a time period to let go of the details and search, intuit deeper answers. It is a time to turn ourselves inward, breathe deep, quiet the mind, take the walk, do the meditation, let go of the details for a few minutes. It's where we have to learn to think for ourselves rather than the bombardment of information that can so easily come at us from other people, from all those electronic devices we hold. And it's learning to trust our intuition first, and then allowing the logic and facts to reorganize themselves like pieces of the puzzle coming together based upon what our gut and intuition is telling us. Mercury retrograde in general, and specifically retrograde in Gemini, is again finding that quiet time in the busyness of retrograde overload. For those of you who have not heard this, in my natal chart, and I'm going to show you that a little bit later, I'm the example tonight, I have Sun, Mercury, Neptune, in that order, between 1 and 2 degrees Scorpio. So I have Mercury, I was born on an exterior conjunction. Mercury was direct. It was on the other side of the sun from planet Earth. It was if you have Mercury less than a half a degree from the sun, whether it's retrograde or direct, it's called combust. You can't see it. It's so close to the sun, you can't, basically see it in the sky. That's where the combust comes from. And so I know that intensity of Sun Mercury, having the mind just go, 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 go. And that need for me, I find I live in nature, I live in the mountains. It's easier for me to take a walk as my meditation to quiet myself down. We will also find that when Mercury's retrograde, because it's going over that certain number of degrees in the sky 3 times, going over some area of our chart 3 times. I always bring the baseball slang up, 3 strikes you're out, 3 times to get it right. We must have multiple communications. What did you say? Let me repeat it back to you. Is this what you meant? This is what I heard. I know we had this conversation and I asked you this question, but I don't remember the answer. I got distracted. I didn't hear the answer. I need to ask the question again. So doing our best not to get huffy and puffy when we're not being heard and we don't hear, because Mercury's not paying attention to the details here. It sometimes has to. That's why we go back to it again and again. But Mercury's going to the opposite side of the chart and in surrendering to the right brain and the intuition. But any of you who've been through Mercury retrogrades, details. You have to pay attention to that kind of stuff. You hear a lot of mundane astrology saying, don't sign any paperwork, don't initiate something with Mercury retrograde. I, for the most part, pay attention to it, but the world does carry on. The rest of the world may not always know it. Sometimes something will happen in one Mercury retrograde cycle, and then next Mercury retrograde cycle it resolves itself. I fought an insurance claim on a car rental that was not my fault, happened during a Mercury retrograde traveling. It took me 4 months to resolve it and I had to prove where I went in the city, and I had to prove a whole bunch of things, and I had the details. And lo and behold, 4 months later, when Mercury went retrograde the next time, they dropped the charge, and it didn't cost me anything. So we'll have those types of hiccups come through them, and so it's learning to go with the flow. But, it is a time period for defensive driving. It is a time period to maybe wait and process through a little bit. We don't always get to. My example today is something that happened here right in the shadow of Mercury retrograde, that it was time. And I think you'll see when I show you this chart example how it was appropriate. So we also, many times, Mercury retrograde, again, 3 passages, we do things more than once. And in the process of looking at it more than once, we can integrate things, we can evolve things, we can release what needs to be released. You don't want to bring out the book that's being published, but it's a great time to re-edit the book. I've always said Mercury retrograde is a great time for astrology readings because you're a little more attuned towards listening, letting go of the fluff. And, astrology has a tendency to answer the bigger questions in life. You also want to be very careful to take the time to do it right the first time. Try being raised by Northern Plains parents from the dirty 30s. I was the oldest of 3 girls on the farm. Wherever that tool was in the machine shed that my dad made me run and get, I better put it right back there in the same spot so we know where to find it. And I married a husband who has Pluto the soul in the 3rd house. I married a Gemini soul, and he's kind of, it just was where I last used it. We go back and forth over some of those details in our world.
What? What, me worry?
You put something back where you found it? If he wants to, the rule is if Lorvari wants to do that with his stuff, he can leave it laying all over the place. But if it's my stuff, you better put it back where, guess what what one of the questions Leroy asked me more than anything else in our working together, let alone marriage. Honey, have you seen my glasses? And many times I can point out his glasses to him. So Mercury retrograde is that time period to slow down and get the clarity on the best course on how to move forward mentally. So a couple more thoughts that I came up with Mercury retrograde in Gemini. The conscious analytical mind is learning to let go and trust its own intuition. This is that Sag polarity. The whole is greater than the parts that make it up. 1 + 1 + 1 = 10 when it comes to the right brain and our intuition. And so this is then, look at your self-talk. Look at how you have your own mental attitudes about yourself. I need to release 10 pounds, or, I need to change my hairstyle, or whatever, we all have about ourselves where we can get into that mental self-talk. There's never a better time to break free from that status quo and really learn to love yourself, warts, farts, and all, like I like to say, than Mercury retrograde. The universe is supporting you in what self-talk, what mental conditioning, habitual patterns do you want to change? We also will have to deal with choices and decisions about where to apply our energy. Because Mercury retrograde, remember, everything's going on. It's the workload increases, the communication increases, all the details that we've got to take care of increases. And when Mercury's retrograde, there needs to be a prioritization about what we can manage to accomplish in an hour, in 24 hours during the Mercury retrograde, including pre and post shadow. So Mercury retrograde, there's an energy of really needing to learn to pace ourselves with all the details that we have going on. We also have to, like I said before, pay extra attention to the details with Mercury retrograde in Gemini. Our young adult son, we've been through, what are we, Dad, now? We have a 19-and-a-half-year-old. We're on the third car. First car was just real smooth, but he didn't have it longer than 4 or 5 months, and circumstances were such that we sold the car. And then we ended up, he moved to live with Mom. Then he ended up back with us. Didn't like the second car Dad bought. We made sure it wasn't Mercury retrograde. It had a few hiccups. He's not doing really good with vehicles at this point. Anyway, he patiently waited through last Mercury retrograde in Aquarius in January, February to buy a car. Did a great job. He's got a very good car, made a good buying decision for him and a good price. And we're quite proud of our 19-year-old qualified for his own car loan without us co-signing. Well, Saturday night, he got a hit and run, we think. We think we're getting the truth. But so here we are in the shadow of Mercury retrograde, and our sweetie pie has a 3-month-old car, brand spanking new, shiny little sports car. Now it's got a pretty big boo-boo in it. Well, stay tuned. We'll see what happens. And I'm sitting here going, I've got to warn my kid when Mercury's getting ready to go retrograde to help him out, because I've noticed a pattern of it's right when Mercury's getting ready to go retrograde that he tends to have things happen. Now, what I've noticed for myself personally with Mercury retrogrades, that saying for March, in like a lamb, out like a lion, or vice versa, that's how they work for me. If it starts out with a bang, sometimes it'll seem to just smooth out, or it'll come along, Mercury turns retrograde and it's pretty smooth, and I'm going, oh, this one's going to be okay. Bam. I do notice that it'll swing either way. So, again, paying attention to the details, and I would say in addition to that, you'll want to really, really trust the intuition through this Mercury retrograde. Understanding the larger picture before making sense of the details, because you'll just run around in a circle if you get lost in the details. You've got to step back from them, even when you're trying to manage them and work your way through them and pay attention to them. At the same time, the retrograde polarity points to, specifically Sag in this case, but Sagittarius in general, like I said before. You've got to be able to handle all that left brain stuff without neglecting right brain and intuition. Then this Mercury retrograde cycle in Gemini is emphasizing returning to our gut and intuition, listening to it, understanding it, following through on those inklings that pop up into your mind without you knowing how the information got there. Intuition is knowing that we know something without knowing how we know it. We're basically opening up into the larger forces of the universe, up into the Akashic record if you want to look at it that way. We tap into that energy and download it. And that's what Mercury retrograde's about. downloading a larger picture. We also, Mercury retrograde in general, and specifically this one in Gemini, Sag polarity, we are needing to recognize metaphysical principles behind any physical laws and manifestations. Sagittarius is metaphysical, Gemini is physical. And Gemini wants to just concern itself with that logic of going from this fact to that fact to that fact and trying to piece it together. And metaphysical principles, natural spiritual laws and principles, which belongs to that archetype of Sagittarius, that is that greater whole. It is our own mind quieting down. It's the ego quieting down to hear what the intuition of our soul has to say. And then it's our own individual soul quieting down to tap into universal soul and hear what Source is trying to say to us. We're expanding our understanding of spiritual laws and principles. We're expanding our understanding of universal truth beyond personal truth with this Mercury retrograde. So again, that right brain is how we need to be making decisions. One more point with Mercury retrograde Gemini, polarity Sag. It's an opportunity to learn the difference between what is truth for us versus what is opinion. Gemini third house is the opinions. You ever talk to somebody who has a heavy Mercury aspects or a lot of Gemini or third house, and you're having a debate with them and they switch the subject a little bit and switch it a little bit and switch it a little bit and switch it a little bit, and they're basically just becoming the devil's advocate? You know, that's an energy of that Gemini that just wants to keep going, trying to be in the facts and logics or a personal opinion. And so this Mercury retrograde going over to the Sag polarity, it allows us to get to the essence of any subject versus our personal opinions, other people's opinions, etc., etc. So sometimes astrology misses the fact that Mercury moves so fast, it is always active or aspecting several planets during its retrograde cycles. And in evolutionary astrology, we utilize all 360 degrees in the cycle of phases and aspects to actually be able to recognize how active Mercury is in a retrograde cycle. You might know, perhaps, Mercury's making 3 conjunctions to Mars. It's making 3 waxing squares to Neptune. Did you know that it's making 3 semi-squares to Uranus? That doesn't show up in our happy little calendars with the printouts. So here is the cycle of 360 with the 8 phases here, new, crescent, first quarter, gibbous, and then all of the aspects. This was fine-tuned by Jeffrey Wolf-Green's teachings in EA. He took this information from Dane Rudhyar, the French humanistic astrologer, and one of Dane Rudhyar's classics on the subject is an old book called The Lunation Cycle, and that's where he goes through the sun and the moon with their 8 phases. We're probably familiar with those phases of the moon, but any 2 planets are in a relationship with any other planet. Any planet is in a relationship with any other planet. They're in a phasal relationship that may or may not have an aspect. And so when we look at this, here's the list of the Mercury retrograde aspects. Now, compared to Mercury retrograde in Aquarius, it's not as busy. It's not quite as active. I think Mercury retrograde in its own sign kind of makes up for it in being active. But here's what we have going on. The conjunctions to Mars, waxing semi-squares to Uranus, the waning trine, waxing sextiles with the nodes, waxing squares to Neptune, and then, of course, this particular Mercury retrograde is very active with Venus. And I suspect, although I haven't looked, I suspect the next Mercury retrograde in Libra this fall will be just as active with Venus because of Venus's retrograde that we have going on here. It's Venus getting ready to go retrograde that creates all of this energy. Mercury is 30 degrees behind Venus, and as it goes retrograde, it then gets to 45 degrees behind Venus, and eventually it's 60 degrees behind Venus. And it goes through this, and then it starts catching up and going backwards past its retrograde. The Mercury-Venus conjunctions are actually, I think it was August 6th or 7th, right about 28, 29 degrees Leo. I like to do a chart for the interior conjunction when Mercury passes over the Sun. May 30th, it'll be 10:56 a.m. Mountain Time. I always like to do Aries houses so that it is germane for all of us. And as you can see right here visually, when Mercury goes retrograding backwards, it's just come past that second conjunction with Mars. It is just had that second waxing square to Neptune. And look at the nodes. Here's the nodes move clockwise around the chart, okay? The nodes move the opposite of the planets. These are the moon's nodes. South node, egoic past, north node, egoic future. In EA, we always start with the planet and we go in a clockwise notion of the nodes. And so the south node is a waxing sextile to Mercury. The north node is a waning trine. We start with Mercury, 240 degrees around the circle to get to the north node. And of course, Venus is ahead of Mercury all the way through. Mercury, now you see the visual, Mercury going backwards, gets further and further from Venus. Mercury goes direct, starts catching up to Venus, and then Venus goes retrograde, and boom, they're going to meet here in late Leo this summer. Also, I thought I would mention this. Mercury made one opposition to Saturn earlier this month, May 3rd, at about 3 degrees Gemini. Notice Mercury goes direct at 4.5 degrees Gemini. So it's quite possible that if you had some things going on for you at the beginning of May, they might cycle back around and repeat, or perhaps the standoffs, opposition resolve at the time that Mercury goes direct. Mercury oppositions to Saturn can be communication standoffs, major differences of opinion. Saturn in Sagittarius, my way or the highway. My religion is better than your religion. I'm right, you're wrong. Now Saturn's retrograde pointing towards Gemini. So the intent is to let go of an absolutism with truth, Saturn in Sag, and to be opening up to understand relativity of truth, Gemini phrase. But it's possible there could have been some butting heads. Mercury-Saturn as a planetary pair is where we have to kind of mentally take responsibility for our world, for our reality, for whatever our situation is. Mercury-Saturn here, Gemini-Sag, you know what's one of those archetypes, a Gemini-Sag, truth versus lies? And let me tell you, Gemini lies just as much as Sagittarius. All 12 signs of the zodiac will lie. But this is where, in general, we understand that archetype of truth versus lies. Now, sometimes Sag can be a fantastic BSer. And Gemini needs to point out the BS and show Sag. So Truth versus lies is not one side of this polarity. Both truth and lies exist both sides. So there's something here about needing to be honest with others, needing to be honest with ourselves. Opposition aspect is about objectivity. And it's also quite possible that as Saturn in Sag is really trying to create a philosophical foundation to its life. By the way, that reminds me, if you are newer to astrology, last winter, maybe the first of the year, I think it was, I did a 5-part series on Saturn and Sag. We did the archetypes, then we did the Saturn cycles, like the first Saturn return, and then we looked at Saturn and Sag through all 12 houses. And I think that workshop group is also on the Astro Library drop-down menu to other workshops.
Actually, you'd want to go to the webinars drop-down menu, and that's a forecasting webinar. We're talking about Saturn's transit, 3-year transit through Sagittarius. So you go to that forecasting webinars page, and you will see a product bundle, as we're calling it, with Saturn and Sag. All 6 of those 2-hour webinars are packaged together for like $89. So it's tremendous value. 12 hours of information for $90. You know, it's $7-8 an hour. So anyway, yeah, you get the PDF. I kind of wanted to point out, Kim, not to interrupt you, but I know that newer people, I'm seeing new names on the board. When you buy something on our website, what you're going to do is get a downloadable PDF. So that's immediately going to end up on your account page. You can download that PDF, print out all the slides, just like you're seeing right here with this Mercury and Gemini public webinar. You can also, on the first page, have an MP3 download link to put on your iPod or your other portable device. You'll have a streaming audio link as well, and the permanent video link, just like you're seeing the presentation tonight, will be archived in that PDF. So that's kind of the new way we're distributing information at EAN, and it allows for a lot of flexibility. Takes a little bit more work, but it's certainly more valuable for all of our Astro listeners out there and our continuing students.
Mm-hmm. So as Mercury goes direct, it's going to be an opportune time to receive some of those intuitive messages from that Mercury-Saturn opposition. Again, Saturn's having to throw off old righteousness and open up and be more flexible, as Mercury is needing to search for deeper intuitive truth. So I wanted to include this aspect here for you because of Mercury stationary direct right where they had this opposition. Mercury's conjunction to Mars. There's 3 of them. 1 in Taurus, 1 in Gemini, 1 in Cancer. Anytime Mercury's retrograde for an aspect, I've highlighted it in red. So these 2 can be great buddies, and they can really piss each other off. And 3 conjunctions. So there's 3 initiations here. It's going to take multiple efforts to move ideas and desires forward. Sometimes a multiple effort to move something from idea stage into manifestation. Mars, that instinctive desire to become and act upon that desired nature. What we have to be careful of with these conjunction is Mercury getting impatient and resorting to impulsiveness, which then just means you might have to do it again. You might have to do something over. So what are you really trying to initiate and move forward with in your life right now? Can you reflect on these dates and these degrees in your chart and see how it is affecting you? These conjunctions are asking us to be flexible, and for the most part, Mercury-Mars can do that. Maybe not so much in that first conjunction in Taurus. I want it my way. And I'll tell you what, the second and third conjunction, it will bring a little bit more flexibility in. I also wanted to point out that, there's something about taking charge of our own life, Mars, actions, initiations, that we're going to be doing throughout these few months in this process of these conjunctions. And we want to take charge of our own life, but we must be very, very careful to allow others to do the same. These conjunctions could have us going, this is what you're going to do because I say so, parent to child, or spouse to spouse. We could want to be, again, directing the show somewhat with these conjunctions. And we want to allow ourselves to really have intuitive sparks come through. We do not have a Mars retrograde in 2015. We will not have one until next spring or summer. In 2016. I think it's summer because the next Mars retrograde is going to be early Sag back into Scorpio. It'll bring that relationship factor in again. And so Mars is moving along just fine here with the inner planets this year. And so it wants to, work with Mercury. So what are the intuitive hits that are coming along about how it is best for you to take action or move forward through all of this? Mercury is going to make waxing semi-squares to Uranus. That means from 0 to 45 degrees. Mercury's moving from new phase to crescent phase. And then it reverses back to new phase with the retrograde semi-square, and then it makes the third aspect and moves into crescent phase. Mercury-Uranus, conscious mind, individuated unconscious mind, Uranus. And so anytime Mercury's going to have an interaction with Uranus, Uranus is going to spill the beans from below the surface and just, bust it out into our mind. And the individuated unconsciousness contains the past, this and all our past lives, our childhood. It contains everything we suppress via the consciousness, Saturn, and we don't want to deal with it. And Uranus also contains the blueprints of the future. So when Uranus, as our individuated unconsciousness, throws things up to the surface, we have to make sense of it. Is it the past? Is it the present? Is it the future? And so the waxing semi-square, moving into crescent phase, the key word for crescent phase is gestation. Now remember, the last Mercury retrograde was in Aquarius. And so Mercury was, dancing with Uranus being in its own sign. Reflect back on where you were, January, February, the last retrograde cycle of Mercury in Aquarius. That's when we were in Florida, and that's when we did our Mastering Chart Interpretation workshop, the end of that retrograde, and brought out some great dynamics of chart interpretation for the people who attended live, and now one Mercury retrograde cycle for any of you who have an interest in taking your interpretation to deeper levels. Mercury didn't conjunct Uranus back then. It was in Aquarius yet. But you get the point. Mercury-Uranus spark things. And now at this waxing semi-square, we're becoming a little more conscious of what's being sparked by Uranus in Aries and just really starting a brand new 84-year cycle of deconditioning and liberating Uranus words, our soul. So there's going to be plenty of messages coming through from the depths. And Mercury wants to listen to what Uranus has to say. The danger of this is if we're not working to quiet the mind, this Mercury retrograde can have us scatterbrained. It can just have us all over the place, being very wishy-washy, running in zigzag directions, running in circles. If we're doing that, we're basically going to run ourselves to the edge of the nervous breakdown, so to speak, and we're going to have one of those famous involutions where we just have to collapse in upon ourselves. We can choose to go that way with Mercury retrograde. The universe can force it with Mercury retrograde. Here again, there's a need to quiet the mind and listening to what our own soul is trying to bring to the surface through Uranus to take into consideration and how we're moving forward. Mercury waxing Uranus. There's going to be insights. There's going to be those deeper understandings. There's going to be those sparks of information. It's very possible something could spark from your childhood. It's quite possible you could have spontaneous past life memories come up to the surface as well. And it could just be something that happened 2 months ago that's cycling back around. It's going to be unique to each of us, and you're going to want to be paying attention. How do I need to be liberating myself? How do I need to think for myself? How do I need to trust my own information? How am I building up self-confidence, crescent phase, to really find my own voice and speak my own truth out there in the universe? This is going to relate quite closely to Mercury's aspects with the nodal axis as well. Speaking of that, again, North Node is a waning trine back to Mercury. It's returning to Mercury. Ego moving forward in Libra. South Node in Aries is a waxing sextile to Mercury. So here's the 3 dates of its aspects. We're listing the North Node one. It's the opposite to Aries with the South Node. And because it's trines and sextiles to Mercury retrograde, we can work easier with the nodes. This is the nicest aspect out of all the Mercury retrograde aspects going on, a trine and a sextile. The South Node, we're breaking free. We're really reaching to learn new things about ourselves. South Node in Aries, new things on emotional levels, South Node. New things about what we want to try, new ways of thinking about ourselves. The waning trine to North Node in Libra, it also is perhaps smoother opportunities of what we are having to go through and shift, evolve, and change in relationships. North Node in Libra. The intent of the transiting nodes right now are to evolve us forward in more equal, fair, and equitable ways. North Node in Libra. The distortions are South Node in Libra, having those standoffs, having those polarizations instead of the harmony. So these Mercury retrograde aspects, there's an ability to listen better. Libra's the psychology of listening. To try out new communicating styles and patterns. There's great potential to have some harmony in relationships through Mercury retrograde, especially if we're holding for fairness with ourselves and others, both directions. And especially if we can let go of that South Node in Aries defensiveness and really make that effort, North Node in Libra, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. How is it happening for them? How does it feel for them? We also have Mercury making those waxing squares, first quarter squares to Neptune. You see the dates here. Neptune, slower planet, isn't moving so fast. So they're all right there, 9-10 degrees, Mercury, Gemini, Neptune, Pisces. Mercury-Neptune as a planetary pair is basically learning how to talk to God, or Goddess, or Great Spirit, or Universal Source, whatever your languaging is. Neptune is the totality of the collective conscious unconsciousness. It is source energy on the deepest levels possible. And because Mercury wants to be left brain, analytical, logical, putting the facts together, Mercury-Neptune can make for a little bit of an interesting planetary pair. Remember I said I had Sun, Mercury, Neptune from 1 to 2 degrees Scorpio? I have a Mercury-Neptune conjunction. It's balsamic, meaning Mercury's a half a degree before passing over Neptune. And, I was one of those people who my brain would go blank whenever I felt triggered. Scorpio, 9th house. Whenever any traumas would come up or anybody would yell at me, I had a father in which there was emotional, mental abuse. My father started yelling at me. Something was going wrong on the farm, and it didn't matter whose fault it was. You were going to take the blame, and I would have a brain that would literally just freeze up. I don't know what my name is. I remember teaching myself to think. Okay, think. And to the point now where I've worked enough on self-reliance, thank you very much, found my voice with my dad. And now I can, I might still go through those time periods, but I've really learned how to retrace my steps, keep the mind going, process the information, take the intuition in however I need to. This is the planetary pair of Mercury-Neptune. So, first quarter square, crises in action. So there's confusion about what choices to make. Remember, Mars is conjunct Mercury. Mars is going to make a waxing square to Neptune here, right through this Mercury retrograde. There's confusion over what choices to make, what actions to take, what to believe, what do I do, how do I speak, what do I say, and yet first quarter square is to bust out and go forward. So it's taking a deep breath when we're not communicating clearly or we're feeling confused. And it's making multiple efforts to listen and speak. Oh, that didn't go well with that person. All right, I'm going to call him up and try again. Maybe I'll wait till after the interior conjunction and Mercury's passed over the sun. But I'm going to try and communicate again because, I don't want us to have this standoff going on. I'd like to hopefully salvage this friendship. It also is going to really be pushing us to let go of that left brain and trust deeper messaging. Mercury's got to take those deep messages that Neptune is bringing through and learn how to communicate them. And learn how to communicate them in a more holistic, authentic way. If you feel yourself running in circles and talking nonsense, take a deep breath, quiet down. Maybe walk away if necessary, come back, try again. And of course, we're going to be having one-on-one conversations with Universal Source. And we're really being asked, first quarter square, to believe differently about ourselves, to think differently about ourselves, to look at our relationship with God, Goddess differently than we have before. In our westernized world, we are so conditioned to not trust the gut, to not trust the intuition. This is an excellent time period to reverse that, to really learn to trust intuition, to hear source, to ask source, speak clearly, please. Show me the truth, show me the truth, show me the truth. And it will come through. Finally, Mercury's aspects to Venus. Remember that I said Mercury's going to start out 30 degrees behind Venus. Then it's going to go back to 45 degrees, 60 degrees behind Venus. And then it's going to, right when it goes stationary direct, two semi-sextiles. I wasn't paying attention. Two semi-sextiles, 30 degrees. One with both direct, and then Mercury starts reversing. And it reverses to the 45 degrees. And then it gets all the way to 60 degrees behind Venus. Goes direct June 11th. And then it has another sextile with Venus. And then it gets 45 degrees away, and I didn't carry on further. It'll go back to that semi-sextile. And again, August 6th or 7th, they'll have a conjunction at either 28 or 29 degrees Leo. So there's always multiple aspects between Mercury and Venus during a Mercury retrograde and during Venus retrogrades. And what we're dealing with here is the conscious mind Mercury and its value system Venus. Now when Mercury's behind Venus, as it's been traveling the last few retrograde cycles, it's a little bit easier to consider our values and then apply them to what we perceive we need as Mercury catches up with Venus again. The next time Mercury's retrograde in Libra later this year, after the Venus retrograde cycle in Leo, Mercury's going to be ahead. And Mercury's going to want to race ahead. It's, even through its retrograde cycle. And then Venus is going to follow behind. And there's a catch-up that has to come there. Wait a minute. I thought I wanted this, but now that I'm in the process of it, I really don't know if I want it. That's the retrograde in Libra. Stay tuned. We'll talk how that shifts then. But here, as Mercury's behind Venus, it's like Mercury had to stay behind after the party and clean it up. Mercury's having to follow up at the end of the inner planets right now. And so it gives that left brain looking over to the right brain. It gives us some time and information to process through what's really important. What do I value? What are my priorities? Add on the conjunctions to Mars. What are my priorities in taking action into the future? And so every time Mercury has one of these aspects to Venus, whether we're aware of it or not in detail, we are sifting through a prioritization process of what is important to us. Now, because Venus has to deal with relativity and relationships, it's possible that there can be some communication mix-ups with these Mercury-Venus aspects, and therefore making another effort. Making an effort to listen with Venus's dual rulership of Libra, making an effort to reach new levels of self-reliance. Mercury retrograde in Gemini, this is who I am, and this is who I'm not. That duality, stepping out of the status quo compensations and just being real with self. I always like to say, sometimes Gemini is being able to make a decision, to take a stand. Standing in our truth the best as we perceive it, and recognizing what is not a truth for us. So, working our way through all of that in the area of relationships is going to be part of this Mercury picture as well. Mercury doesn't always have this many aspects to Venus in a retrograde. In my years of looking at the Mercury retrograde cycles, this is quite a few aspects between Mercury and Venus. So you're going to want to be paying attention here of how does it feel? What feels right on an intuitive gut level moving forward? And if you're getting into the Gemini chaos, deep breaths, walk in nature, Tai Chi, yoga, sleep on it, Neptune. Breathe, slow down. Make the decision as best as possible in the time that I have. And take more time if it's being allowed in the universe. Finally, sometimes I'll just check to see if there's something going on during new moons, full moons, Mercury retrograde. Look at this next full moon we have coming up here, June 2nd, 10:19 a.m. I did it for Rapid City, again, Aries houses. This is right after the interior conjunction. Mercury, remember that was at 9 degrees, 9 degrees on the 30th of May. Mercury's now retrograded back to 7 degrees Gemini. But look at here how it's still sandwiched with Mars. Mars has just moved over the sun. Here's the moon making an opposition. Mercury's going to retrograde back to 4.5. It's going to be within orb of an opposition to Saturn, but there was only that one. And then look at how we pull in this T-square with Neptune on the full moon. So this is going to be the full moon of Sagittarius. It's going to definitely be bringing up communication issues. It's going to be bringing up the truth versus lies issues. It's going to be really asking us what do we believe on some of the deepest levels possible. Where are we having the communication issues or polarizations between ourselves and others with truth versus lies? You can see we have within orb on the full moon of a grand trine in fire signs. Jupiter's here in Leo, moon in Sag, and Uranus in Aries. This will bring some feistiness to the communications. We might have everybody thinking they're right, and it's going to behoove us to really make that effort to listen to what others have to say in some of our decision-making process. So, feisty full moon, and because it's going to come a few days off of the interior conjunction, when Mercury's busy making the second of 3 aspects all over the place. The other thing that happens during this full moon, as you can see, Moon's going to have an opposition to Mercury as well as to Mars. Moon's going to have a conjunction to Saturn. Moon's going to make squares to Chiron and then Pisces. So, questing for truth. Moon's going to be sitting on the spot that Mercury's pointing to. And it can be an apex with this grand trine. So this might be a full moon to really search for what are highest and best answers for myself. Or to really allow some quiet time in nature for communing with the gods and goddesses, so to speak. So this is all my material that I have other than a chart example for you, because I thought I'd be a little shorter this class. So I'm just going to give a quick example. I'm not going to, I won't speak too long on it, and then we'll see if anybody has questions. But I'm going to start with showing you a picture of my 3 cats. I'm an old farm girl. I've had cats and dogs almost my entire life. This black and white here is my Mr. T or Taro. I have no idea his birth date. I just thought he acted like a Taurus, so I called him Taro. He evolved into Mr. T He transitioned last December. And last Friday, my pretty boy, PB, transitioned out of his body. So 2 of my 3 cats have transitioned within the last 5 months. Pretty boy, I have a birth date on him. I don't have a time. This is his brother Loverboy, so PBLB. Everybody in our household is down to, we didn't consciously do this. Kim Marie, KM, Leroy, LR, Forrest, FG, Forrest Gabriel, our son, and the 3 cats, Mr. T, PBLB. Just naturally happened. They're Manx rejects. PB has or LB has a shorty tail. PB, here's the 4-inch tail sticking up right there. He was always, and these 2 are Geminis. These 2 cats are Geminis. And I was thinking about, and I'll show you my chart and where his transition is in my chart. And I was thinking about Mercury retrograde. It's in my 5th house. 5th house is children. These are my kids. I never had biological children. I am a cat lady. I have 2 younger sisters, and between the 3 of us, we had, help me out, 10 cats, down to 8 now. So, and I had my babies before my marriage, and that came with a son. And so, how it happened was I got Mr. T as an adult stray. These 2 were born, a stray mother had him in underneath the porch of my next door neighbor. I came home from a trip, and the neighbor showed up within an hour of walking in the door with a bucket of 1-day-old kittens and said, your cat had kittens. I had a 4th cat at that point. Nope, my cat can't have kittens. Well, here's some kittens. I was able to trap the mother, found homes for mom and the 2 other siblings to these 2 guys. And the person who was going to take these 2 didn't. I got attached. I know they were born on June 2nd of 2000 in Rapid City. I don't know the time, so I have a tendency to just go Aries houses. Pretty boy and lover boy, look at their birth date. Sun 12 degrees Gemini, new moon. Look at this, Venus here at 10 degrees. PB, he's been going downhill for a while. And, I said sometimes, it's not, those decisions right when Mercury's going retrograde. I really was making an effort to quiet down and listen to him. And the last 2 days, he just kept coming up and laying with me and sleeping with me and being with me. And I said, you're trying to tell me goodbye, aren't you? You want me to let you go, don't you? And so I chose to euthanize him. I've never euthanized a cat up until Mr. T 5 months ago. He was a sumo wrestler, taking on all kinds of water weight from cancer. Pretty boy was an insect bite that took out the thyroid and the kidneys, although it took him a long time to go, and I'm grateful to my energetic balancing work for that. But look where Mercury was Friday afternoon. I didn't know that. I'm just trying to intuitively make the best decision, and if Leroy will attest, Mercury shadow in Gemini, I'm like, oh, do I or don't I? Do I or don't I? Is this the right thing to do? Is there one more supplement I can try? Is there one more food I can try? He just got to the point where he couldn't hold food down anymore. And I came to that decision intuitively. Leroy, bless his soul, always comes with me. I don't think I could do this on my own. And we walk into the vet and they go, well, we have anti-nausea drugs. Oh man, threw me into a tizzy all over again, Mercury Gemini. And I took a little time to talk to PP and Leroy and the 3 of us, and and then the vet said, well, even with the anti-nausea medication, we'd be lucky if it added weeks on to his life, maybe a month. And I'm like, no, PB wants to be free. He was always a very independent cat, very active, freedom-loving cat, and I've been energizing him and healing body and spirit for the last 3 days and just really wishing him all the best right now. And look at how in his chart, here's the sun right on his Saturn, Jupiter, second house, leaving his body. And again, this is Aries houses because I don't have a time. But even through the signs, you can see, what's taking place here. There might be other aspects, but boy, this is what really stuck out to me. And then when I saw that Mercury right on the sun, and I've always, I have 2 twins. I have 2 twin cats. They've always been my Gemini twins. And I'm grieving, but I'm so glad I listened to my intuition and heard PB saying, I'm done with this body, Mama. Pets don't have the transition issues that we do. Here's my chart. For those of you who've never seen it, October 24th, 57, 12:43 p.m., San Francisco. And so, of course, I knew. Okay, sun, opposing my moon. Yep, got that one. I had forgotten where Mercury was. Here's that 12-degree Gemini Mercury opposing my Saturn and my Venus. And I can't say that either one of these cats were easy to release. And I had Mr. T, the black and white, 15 and a half years. As you can see, PB will be 15, would have been 15, June 2nd, and Loverboy will be 15. I mean, I've had these cats, good life, good years, but boy. Whew, so Mercury retrograde in my 5th house of kids. These are my kids. And one to release back to spirit, and one still around. And Loverboy, healthy as a horse. But it's pretty tough right now. I was okay when I let Mr. T go and I had the 2 twins, but now I've let go of 2 cats and I'm down to 1. And Leroy went off today to do some stuff, and the kid went off to do some stuff, and I'm in the house alone. And between LB's meowing, Loverboy's meowing, Mom, there's nobody here. It's just you and me. Boy, we had a very interesting day today. We're processing through the grief. So, other aspects going on as well. Deeper understandings here in relationships. Venus getting ready to oppose my Pluto. But I just wanted to show you the Mercury retrograde through these 2 charts, Pretty Boys and mine. Mercury retrograde will act in a gazillion different ways. It's all going to be unique to each individual soul's circumstances, situations, and conditionings. If anybody has questions or comments, I'd be happy to entertain. I've been putting this t-shirt in. I hope I survive the Mercury retrograde. I think I will. But boy, I'm really processing with this particular one. And really talking to my spirit PB, and spirit Mr. T, and calling all the grandmothers in on the cliff and having them help me. Go through a burial process, go through the ceremony, go through everything. Final comments. This Mercury retrograde in Gemini. How do I adjust to the changes in my world with response over reaction? So as the grief hits me, my crying jags come up, I just have to step back and recognize PB's so happy to be out of pain. Both of my cats are. And I have to recognize, yes, I can have my human grief, but remember that North Node Libra, how do we take others into consideration with our actions? I did that debate, well, maybe I should just wait. Maybe I should do something after Mercury retrograde. And it came through so clear to me. It's in the last few days. No, Kim, you were meant to do it now, right as Mercury's turning retrograde. So sometimes there's those exceptions to the rule where the retrograde is the decision, is the time to let go. How do I quiet my mind and listen to my inner voice? Like I've just been sharing, you're all going to have your own things you're going through in this way. How do I align myself with my greater truth? The Sag polarity. How do I trust my own intuition? So these are the questions you can inwardly, outwardly speak for yourself, to yourself, with yourself, and with others throughout this Mercury retrograde.
Just a reminder too, Kim, as you kind of finish up today, and it was a great class. Thank you for the effort. Anybody out there that's interested in joining us for the next couple of retrogrades coming up, we have Neptune and Chiron and Pisces both going retrograde in June. Oh, there you go. There's the slide. So we want to invite you to go to that forecasting webinars page. You can get your registration link right after your enrollment and join us for a two-part series. So we'll have that on Monday, June 15th, Neptune Retro and Pisces, and then two nights later, it's the same time slot, 6 to 8 p.m., Chiron Retro in Pisces. So consider joining us for that two-part series in mid-June. Thank you, Kim.
You're welcome. Let me back up. I always like to do free public webinars every so often because it really gives the public a chance to familiarize themselves with how webinars are taught. I love teaching these webinars because it allows me to be in the comfort of my own home and reach people all across the world. So here's the next 3 Mercury retrogrades with dates and time. And here's the next Mercury retrograde class, which will come in September with Mercury's retrograde in Libra. And so here's that list again. You see the Mercury retrograde. Finally, the thing that I do at the end of the Mercury retrograde webinars is I put a listing of all the Mercury retrograde aspects in date order so that you can see. So you can see all these aspects from one exterior conjunction to the interior, and then the next slide I'll show you it again. You can see where Mercury goes to shadow, where it goes retrograde, interior conjunction, and then here's the second slide. So you've got those aspects in date order that you can refer to. You see where Mercury goes direct, leaves shadow, next exterior conjunction with the sun.
And just as a reminder, everybody, you'll get this PDF so you can actually go to these two slides, these two aspects slides for Mercury retrograde, print them out, put them on your wall, and it's a great thing to have in your conscious awareness of how Mercury retrograde is going to be working for you. Also, on that first page of that PDF will be the MP3 download link, the MP3 streaming audio link, as well as the permanent video link of the presentation you just seen. So be looking for that coming in an email from Media Monk in the next 24 to 48 hours.
Right here. Your first slide. Well, and he's got a third download link now so that you can do it on your portable phone, on your smartphones. Is that it? Or he muted him.
The one's a streaming link, so you can actually stream it directly on your portable device by hitting the MP3 audio link. The MP3 audio download link would be, of course, if you're on a computer, you can download it to your computer and then put it on any portable device. But just know
what link am I missing here? Because you've just started this, changed this. What link am I missing here?
The MP3 audio link and the
Yes.
MP3 download link. So you have them both there, but you're calling them both the same.
Oh, you switched that.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have people that have asked for that portability, that want to put it on their computer and put it on another device. So we provide that compressed or zip file. That's the download link. But the audio link's kind of nice because you can just kind of, if you're not being able to watch it, you can just stream it from your iPhone or your Samsung SG Galaxy or whatever right there from this page as well. And of course, that video link's going to be the unlisted YouTube video of this content that you guys just saw. So
All right.
all three was available with all of our forecasting webinars. So a lot of value there.
Any questions from anybody? I think you muted yourself, Leroy.
You're just getting some I guess, recognition of the losses of your cats on the board. So thanks for Vicky, Judy, and Wanda for recognizing that. It's been kind of an interesting week for all of us, and we appreciate your condolences in that regard.
Yes, very, very, very much so. I appreciate all your thoughts and prayers, and energize my pretty boy and my Taro just out having lots of fun on the cliff. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, and wishing you the best. And Leroy will email you this link within the next day or so. Adios.